President Trump's speech today in Saudi Arabia was certainly to set the tone for his administration as to how he handles the threat that we face, that we call terrorism, the war on terrorism. And obviously he's speaking to a Muslim audience, and he seemed to be careful to say that there is a craven ideology that we are faced with rather than Islam itself. So your reaction to that?
Well, what I heard him say as well, that it was more especially a fight between good and evil. And he was talking about the people. And I applaud him for being frank. However, I have to disagree. I have to disagree with the fact that the good and evil is about the people, and there is a separate ideology within Islam. Unfortunately, Islam is the evil ideology. Islam wants to submit us all, is full of violence, and at the end of the day is our biggest enemy. It's a totalitarian ideology that wants to submit us and is full of violence and very terroristic kind of thing. So I have to disagree with President Trump that Islam is not the problem. Islam is the problem. It's not that we have two different parts of kinds of Islam. I understand and I acknowledge the fact that we have two kinds of people. There are moderate people, moderate Muslims and non-moderate Muslims. But there is really only one Islam, and that's the Islam of the life of Muhammad, of the Quran, of the Hadith, of the Sirah. That is the Islam, and unfortunately by saying anything else, we will not bring a solution to the problem any closer.
10 years ago, you were predicting the kind of civilizational changes that we're seeing in Europe now. Do you feel vindicated in any way?
Well, you know, we are in the process of being replaced by demography, by immigration, and by the biggest mistake we made in the last decades, which is called cultural relativism. We got millions of people to our continent by not demanding that they assimilate to our values. They took their own values, which are Islamic values, that are once again totally incompatible with Christianity or Judaism, which are incompatible with freedom. And now we are facing the problems. We have a lot of problems in almost every European country when it comes to immigration, when it comes to terror. Last summer we had a Black Summer in Europe where almost every week, sometimes twice a day, we had terror attacks in the name of Allah by terrorists shouting Allahu Akbar every time again for numerous times. So we are facing a problem now, and we can only deal with it if we first face the truth that might not be too politically correct, but still is the truth, and that is that Islam, and not Islamism or radical Islam, but Islam is the evil ideology like communism or fascism that has no place in a free society, and at the end of the day will replace us and we will lose our freedom instead of regaining it.
So what do you envision in the next 10 years? If the trends continue as they are, what does this mean for Europe as well as for America?
Well, you know, what is happening in Europe will also happen to America, maybe a bit later. You are bordering Mexico, we are bordering Africa and Arabia, which is of course some kind of difference, but I'm positive, you know. We are in a process of replacement. If you think that you have seen anything in the last few years with the Syrian refugee crisis, then you haven't seen anything yet, you know. If you look at the demographics of Africa, it will explode. 1 billion Africans today, at the end of the century, it will be quadrupled to 4 billion people, and 1/3 of them is already saying today that they want to move north to the European continent. So you haven't seen anything yet. If we don't act today when it comes to immigration and defending our own culture, we will become not only Arabia, but a province of Africa. And what will happen in Europe, maybe later, will happen to my American friends as well. So be vigilant, defend your freedom, don't be politically correct, speak the truth, because I know that your sons, your children and your grandchildren also want to live in a free America. And once again, Islam and freedom are incompatible.
You lived for many years with a security detail pretty much 24 hours a day, and you described it as being like a prisoner in a way. Why would you do that? What motivates you to keep going?
Well, you know, I didn't ask for it. I spoke out against radical mosques in Holland, against the Islamization process in my own country and the rest of Europe, and all of a sudden I was on the death list of Al-Qaeda, of ISIS, of the Pakistani Taliban, and that's of course quite serious. So the Dutch government gave me indeed 24/7 protection now for 13 years, and I'm in the process of fighting for the freedom of my people. I lost my own freedom. I can do nothing without a lot and a big of police detail anywhere and everywhere I go. The sad thing is, however, that now 13 years later, after it started for me, we are all on the death list of those kind of organizations. You can see it almost every week, every month in a country in the West where brutal attacks are by Islamic terrorists, and innocent people, children, grandparents die walking through the streets in Nice or going to the Christmas market in Berlin, or well, we all remember all the attacks that happened in the United States as well. So the only alternative I have is to continue to fight for the just cause, the defending of freedom, and to wake people up. You know, it's not, which is the biggest misconception in the West today, it's not that Islam is a religion of peace and there are only a few Muslims who make it a bad deal. It's the core business of Islam to dominate and to fight for extremism. If you look at my country, for instance, to give you one example, the majority of the Muslims, almost 80%, believe that to use violence in the name of Islam is a thing that could be applauded for, which is an enormous amount of people who support and could support violence in any way in the name of Islam. 11% of the Dutch Muslims, which is more than 100,000 people in Holland, even said in a survey of the University for Amsterdam, a kind of leftist organization, but still they said that more than 100,000 Muslims declare that even in Holland they are willing to use violence in order to achieve the goals of Islam, which is twice the amount of the Dutch army. So it's not just a minority. Of course, not all Muslims are terrorists, but unfortunately, almost all terrorists today are Muslims, and that's a reality that we should face. And are supported financially and certainly when it comes to the ideology by countries as Saudi Arabia today.
Your stance has been summed up by many of your critics as being just simply a function of you're a nativist, you're a bigot, you're an Islamophobe. But you talk about the formation of your thought and your beliefs, your motivation, as going back to 2 years that you spent in Israel, and also
yes.
a number of trips to Arab countries. Can you talk about how that's formed your
Yes.
view?
Well, first maybe you allow me to react on indeed that some people call me bigot or anything else. And let me tell you that the Netherlands is still a very tolerant country. If I would be anything like that, we would have 0.1% of the vote. Today, my party, the Party for Freedom, is the second biggest party out of a 13-party lower house in parliament. So we are very successful and anything but extreme right or bigot. And indeed, I fight for freedom. And I lived in my youth a few years in the state of Israel. And I traveled all over the Arab world. I was 2 or 3 times before I became in this trouble with my security. I was in Iran, I was in Iraq, I was in Syria, in Egypt, in Jordan, in Afghanistan, in many countries. And I often saw very friendly people, but I also saw the hate that came to anything that is not only Israel. Israel, I believe, is the canary in the coal mine. Israel is a beacon of light in an area of total darkness. Israel is our first defense line, you know. Mothers in Israel lay awake at night wondering about their sons if they will come home safe, and that's the only reason why the mothers in Europe can sleep safely at night without thinking about that. So if Israel falls, they are fighting our fight. If Jerusalem falls, Athens, Rome and Amsterdam will be next. So we have to be in support all the time, and I'm the biggest supporter in my country for the state of Israel because they are one of us and we are all Israel.
If I understand, you regard yourself as an agnostic in terms of religious beliefs, but you talk about the importance of Judeo-Christian culture. Now, there are a lot of people who would say, you know, I'm a humanist, and I think all religions are detrimental to society. So why do you think that the Judeo-Christian culture is important for preserving?
Well, you know, we don't, it's our identity, it's who we are, and you can share the identity without belonging to it yourself. It's very important that we share the same values when it comes for instance, to tolerance. Only we took it a little bit too far. We have to be tolerant to the tolerant, but we forgot that we should not be tolerant to the people who are intolerant to us. So I advocate that we start being intolerant to the intolerant. Of course, I still want to be tolerant to the tolerant. And I believe that indeed the cultural relativism, the politicians and the academics who fool the people by saying that all cultures are equal is the biggest mistake we have. We lost in Europe our identity. People don't know who they are anymore. And if you don't know what you are, you don't know what you are not either. So I am very much in favor of regaining the nation state that we lost in Europe. You know, when in the project of the European Union and Brussels, we lost our national identity, and we have to regain it. We have to be proud again of our own identity, and we have to acknowledge when you go how to deal with people who leave your culture or your religion. When it comes to Christians, to non-Muslims, to Jews, look how we treat them compared to how all those groups and people, individuals and collectively, are being treated in Islamic society. It's total barbarism compared to what we do. So I'm not ashamed to say that our culture is far better than the Islamic culture, which is a culture of barbarism. We should be honest and speak about the truth, and this unfortunately is the truth.
And to be clear, you're not against people from other ethnic groups, other countries immigrating?
No, not at all. No, not at all. Of course, we are against the immigration of people from Islamic countries, even though we acknowledge the fact that even not all not all Muslims are violent or terroristic people. It would be ridiculous even to suggest, but we have enough Islam in our society already. We cannot handle it. We are being replaced, and it's impossible for Islam. The word itself means, as you know, submission. It's impossible for the ideology Islam to assimilate in a society. People can, but the ideology cannot. And you see it in almost every country in the world today where Islam is dominant. You see a total lack of civil society, a lack of freedom, a lack of free speech. And we should not import that anymore to our society, not because we hate the people, but because we have a problem with the ideology that, once again, is totally incompatible with freedom.
So, one last question. Do you foresee a day in which, if things develop as they are, that you'll no longer be criticized as a nativist, as a bigot?
Well, you know, I'm not only criticized. Like I said, I'm the leader of the second most popular party in Holland, which is an enormous achievement for a party that only exists 10 years. We are a very new party, and we are the second biggest party in my country. So we have more supporters even than ever before. Of course, people criticize us, but perhaps because they don't like to deal with the issues we are handling. And it comes with a price, you know. It's not easy to speak out like we do. You're taken to court, you become on death list of terroristic organization, people call you a bigot. But still, if you know that you are talking the truth, if you can look in the mirror without being ashamed at night, then you know you're doing the good thing. And at the end of the day, in my fight for freedom, our fight for freedom, it will have an effect, because more people ever in all European countries, people stand up and say enough is enough, it should change. Unfortunately, we have very little time, so the change should go a bit quicker than it's going today, but still is a positive sign. If we don't act, if we don't stopping being naive, we will lose it. You know, it's not that we are facing an economic problem. You can deal with economical problems by smaller government, lower taxes, like the Californian Reagan agenda, for instance, but we are faced today with an existential problem. That's the biggest difference. If we don't act today, we cease to exist in the future. And more people see it every day. Only the political elite is not willing to deal with it soon enough. So we have to work a little bit harder than we already do.
Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.